Hey everyone, Zian over here from Nintendo Life, and today we're here to share with you our review of Samurai Shodown on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by Damien McFerran for NintendoLife.com, but was reworked into this video by me. When Street Fighter II arrived in arcades in the early 90s, it turned the one-on-one fighter into the genre of choice for millions of players, and predictably caused a deluge of copycat clones to flood the market, each offering a slightly different take on the concept. Few of these could hold a candle to Capcom's efforts, but one title stood out from the rest, not only due to its unique and atmospheric setting, but the way it actually played. Samurai Shodown, which is also known as Samurai Spirits in Japan, was the work of SNK's crack developers and former Capcom staff, which perhaps accounted for the incredible leap in quality over its rivals. With a focus on weapons, this was a more methodical fighter, in which victory could be a matter of a few successful blows. Fast forward to the present day, and Samurai Shodown continues to hold a high level of respect among fighting game aficionados, even if many of them argue that the series saw its zenith with 1994's Samurai Shodown 2. After resurrecting its equally popular King of Fighters series in 2.5D, a rejuvenated SNK performed a similar trick with Samurai Shodown, bringing the game to modern consoles last year. Predictably, the Switch has had to wait a little longer, but the good news is that those few months have been totally worth it for fighting game fans. Safari Games, the company responsible for this conversion, has skillfully carried over everything that matters without having to cut too many corners when it comes to performance. Now, if you've never played a Samurai Shodown game before, a brief introduction is probably in order. While it has things like projectile attacks, combo moves, super moves, and all that jazz, it really is worth stressing that the core gameplay feels very, very different from the likes of Street Fighter V and King of Fighters 14. The fact that the characters have lethal weapons means that fights are often over as quickly as they begin. Hitting home with a powerful heavy attack is enough to slash away a massive chunk of your opponent's health bar, and, as a result, the game is less about pressing your advantage as it is about playing defensively and waiting for an opening to appear. Past sequels have tried to tinker with this slow and steady approach with varying degrees of success, so it's pleasing to note that with this update, SNK has utterly nailed what made the series so compelling back in the early 90s. And while Samurai Shodown in 2020 obviously looks a lot better than it did back then, it feels just as fresh and different now as it did in 1993. Battles have a wonderful ebb and flow to them, with the balance shifting quickly between opponents as they mix up powerful blows with tricky special combos. Knowing that a single mistake could leave you open for a crippling attack from your foe makes every dash, every leap, and every attack something you need to consider carefully. Few fighting games punish you as dramatically as Samurai Shodown, with the possible exception of Square's underrated Bushido blade. Samurai Shodown's controls are relatively simple when compared to Capcom's Street Fighter II, largely because the Neo Geo only had 4 attack buttons compared to the 6 seen on Capcom's arcade game. SNK has tweaked things a little here by giving players weak, medium, and strong attack strengths, along with a button for kicking, a cheeky move which can often help surprise and unbalance stubborn opponents. Having more granular control over the power of your weapon attacks gives the game additional depth, and this is supplemented by the famous Rage Gauge, which can be activated when it's full once per match to make your fighter more potent for a limited period. In this enhanced state, you'll also be able to unleash a new Lightning Blade attack, which, along with super specials, trigger a cool cinematic animation that calls to mind the eye-popping supers from Street Fighter IV and Street Fighter V. Some of these super powerful special moves do feel like they unbalance the game slightly, especially when you consider how easy they are to execute, but learning to deal with them is all part of the challenge. And of course, fighting games live or die by the selection of characters they offer, and the good news is that Samurai Shodown's somewhat modest cast of 16 fighters offers plenty of variety and challenge, even for veterans of the franchise. It's also worth noting that the 3 all-new combatants who rub shoulders with the 13 returning cast members are a fairly likable trio, and SNK is supporting the game with additional characters via a DLC campaign. Hisame Shizumaru from Samurai Shodown 3 is free, but the other fighters who make up the Season 1 DLC pack will cost you real money. We're still not entirely comfortable with the notion of having to pay more cash to access additional characters in a game that already costs quite a large amount of money, but it would seem that that's the way the market has gone now, so moaning about it makes little difference. Visually, Samurai Shodown is a treat, running at a reasonably smooth 60 FPS in both docked and handheld modes. When played in the former, it's incredibly close to the PlayStation 4 version in terms of how things look, although the animation on background elements can be a little choppy when compared to the smooth movements of the fighters themselves. And granted, Samurai Shodown doesn't aim for the same graphical complexity as, say, Street Fighter V, but it's still a gorgeous looking spectacle. We especially like the way each character is covered in brushstrokes, which makes them look like they've stepped straight out of a painting from the Sakoku period. And sadly, the visuals do take a noticeable hit when played in handheld mode. The overall resolution plummets, and elements of the on-screen UI also degrade quite alarmingly. However, the gameplay remains the same, which is what really counts. Load times are also a little longer than we'd like, but not so excessive that they ruin your enjoyment. There's no denying that the core fighting engine for Samurai Shodown is as solid as a rock, and if you've got a local opponent to play against, then you're in for a treat. Likewise, those of you who love playing online should find plenty of challenge here. The only people who will feel left out in this situation are those who crave a solo challenge, as the game is still somewhat lacking when it comes to single-player content. Each character has a unique narrative to uncover in the main story mode, but there's little to unearth beyond that, unless you're unreasonably excited by the prospect of unlocking videos, artwork, and background music. And while fighting games by their very nature are social affairs that are best enjoyed with a second player, there has been a concerted effort in the genre recently to bulk up the amount of content for solo players. But that hasn't really happened with this update, and that's worth keeping in mind if you plan to play alone more than against other human foes. And it doesn't really help that SNK's effort to change this doesn't really work. The dojo mode sees you facing off against ghost fighters in what is misleadingly termed asynchronous multiplayer. These are CPU-controlled characters who base their fighting style on those of the player who created them, with the idea being that as you play, the game learns your signature style and applies it to the ghost in question. It's a neat idea on paper, but we're not entirely convinced it works. Even the ghosts with seemingly high rankings were fairly easy to defeat, with some displaying some rather odd tactics and strategies. SNK might be able to tinker with this aspect a little more to make it more robust, but at the moment, it feels like a failed experiment to us. While Samurai Shodown has taken a very slight visual hit as part of its protracted journey to Switch, the most important thing is that the core 60 FPS gameplay remains intact. The downgrade is most noticeable when playing in handheld mode, but it's still incredibly enjoyable and compelling, especially if you appreciate fighting games that exercise your mind as well as your fingers. The single-player portion of the game is perhaps a little too lacking by 2020 standards, and some of the ideas like dojo mode don't work as well as they should. But with its appealing cast of fighters, decent multiplayer options, and a host of new gameplay ideas to keep things feeling fresh, Samurai Shodown is nonetheless a confident and assured update of a classic fighting game series, and bodes well for SNK's future attempts to resurrect its enviable stable of titles for the modern era. We here at Nintendo Life give Samurai Shodown on the Nintendo Switch an 8 out of 10. If you'd like to read our full written review, you can find that along with a ton of more info on Samurai Shodown, including DLC character info, over at nintendolife.com. I am so bad at this game, it's not even funny.
勝者シャルロット